If it hadn't been discovered when it was in 1901, no one would possibly believe that it could exist because it's so sophisticated.
This mechanism would be remarkable even if it was a less clever thing than it is.
This is the story of one of the most extraordinary finds in history. This corroded bronze object is a machine that can look into the future. It was built 2,000 years ago in ancient Greece.
Somebody somewhere in ancient Greece built an extraordinary machine that was actually a mechanical computer.
100 years ago, a group of divers chanced upon a wreck full of the largest hoard of ancient Greek treasures ever found. Among the priceless ancient Greek bronze sculptures is another bronze object, no bigger than a modern laptop. It's known as the Antikythera mechanism. As a team of scientists try to unravel the secrets of the Antikythera mechanism, we are taken on a journey that charts the fall of one great ancient empire and the rise of another.
An ancient Greek scientist had done a truly remarkable thing. He'd found a way of using bronze gear wheels to track the complex movements of the moon and probably all the planets as well. It was a mechanism of truly staggering genius.
This is the story of the world's first computer. If it hadn't been for a storm on the rocky Greek island of Antikythera 100 years ago, one of the most bewilderingly complex objects ever to emerge from the ancient world might never have been found. After they'd sheltered from the storm, a team of sponge divers decided to try their luck underwater. The sponge diver hadn't discovered a graveyard. He'd come upon a heap of marble and bronze sculptures. It was part of the biggest hoard of Greek treasure ever found. It had come from an overloaded Roman galley sunk 2,000 years ago, as Rome's empire began to grab Greece's overseas colonies in the Mediterranean. By accident, the divers had rescued some of ancient Greece's most beautiful artifacts. But among the bronze and marble statues was perhaps the most important object of all, item 15,087 in the Athens Museum. It had soon split into several badly corroded lumps of bronze. Then, remarkably, researchers noticed tiny gear wheels in the machine. Much later, the Antikythera mechanism, to the amazement of scientists, would be revealed as the world's first computer, built 2,000 years ago by a Greek genius.
You're just amazed by the quality of the workmanship, and then suddenly you look and you see that they're tiny Greek characters engraved into the actual metal itself. The shock they must have had when they first saw this and saw these gear wheels. They knew wooden gear wheels were used in Greek mills and so on, but nothing was known like these precision metal engineered gears.
It was against the background of this Greek mystery that in the year 2000, a team of international scientists was formed by astronomer Professor Mike Edmonds to investigate the puzzle. As a group, they were an odd mixture of astronomers, historians of science, and mathematicians.
The Antikythera mechanism is an incredible puzzle. Probably one of the most fiendish puzzles in history. We had no confidence ourselves that we would actually be able to solve it.
Tony Freeth, a mathematician, coordinated and led some of the team's major investigations.
So when we started, we thought we'd try and put the basic information together. Maybe the objects from the wreck would help us piece together some clues. You know, how old was it? Where did it come from? We had many, many questions.
In 1976, another expedition to the Antikythera wreck by the famous French diver Jacques Cousteau had given them their first clues. Cousteau discovered much cargo left after the initial find in 1900. There was more pottery, many more amphorae, some of the original timbers from the ship, and bronze figurines. Cousteau believed it was a Roman galley. Significantly, his divers brought up bronze and silver coins, an archaeologist's dream for dating a treasure site.
These are the coins that came from the expedition of Jacques Cousteau in 1976?
Yes, a lot of silver and bronze coins.
So 36 silver coins plus some bronze coins?
Some bronze coins.
Okay, so this has a basket on it.
It has a basket introduced by the kings of Pergamon. Most of the coins were struck in Pergamon, around, let's say, 30 of them, and the rest were struck in Ephesus.
But what do you think they actually tell us about where the ship came from?
They can tell us that the ship came from Asia Minor.
What date would this be?
And these are dated in the decade from 70 to 60 before Christ.
These coins from the cargo had given us our first clues to the likely date and route of the ship's last voyage.
So what were these Greek treasures and the strange Antikythera mechanism doing on a Roman ship 2,000 years ago?
Since the time of Homer, the Greeks had been great sailors, forging settlements and remote colonies in places such as Pergamon in Asia Minor and further north in the Black Sea. And everywhere the Greeks went, they left giant temples to the gods that protected them. But by the time the galley sank in the middle of the 1st century BC, these far-flung Greek settlements had become vulnerable to a hostile new power in the Mediterranean, Rome.
But as we looked closer at the Antikythera cargo, we began to realize this wasn't a marauding Roman warship plundering Greek colonies, but something more unusual.
It was a quite big ship, probably a huge big for this period, for these Roman times. One of the probably biggest trade ships. Only few harbors can receive this kind of ship, and that is probably Delos, Pergamum and Ephesus, that region, Rhodes.
Tell me about where these amphorae come from.
Look, these amphoras, these 5 amphoras, they're coming from Rhodes, from the island of Rhodes. These 2 of them, they're coming from the island of Kos. They were containing wine.
Tell me what you can say about the date of these amphorae and therefore the date of the shipwreck.
These amphoras, they are between 65 and 50 BC.
These dates were almost identical to those we'd found on the coins from the wreck.
So we believe that the galley started its journey somewhere in the Greek colonies in Asia Minor. Possibly Pergamon, possibly Ephesus, but somewhere along this coast. The ship would have sailed down, probably calling in at Kos, then onto Rhodes, where it loaded more amphorae, and then set out, heavily overloaded, on the trade route back to Rome, where it met its fate in a storm at the island of Antikythera.
Some of the ship's cargo had been dated very accurately to between 70 BC and 50 BC. Perhaps this was now close to the vessel's last voyage. But the group couldn't be entirely sure the bronze mechanism really was 2,000 years old. Perhaps it was a modern machine that had been dropped from a passing ship, by chance coming to rest on the wreck the sponge divers had found. So the team decided to scrutinize previous work done on the machine.
The team were drawn to the work of Derek de Solar Price, he was an English-born physicist. He started work in the 1950s, first in Cambridge and later in Yale. He was the first to really examine the pieces in very great detail, and he started doing radiographs and being able to see the insides of the mechanism. Suddenly, out of those radiographs, they realized there were 27 gears inside this thing. It was seriously complicated.
Price was the first person to count the gear teeth with
Yes.
Caracalos, and Caracalos'
his
wife as
Emily.
well. Yes, yes.
And they did it by drawing around the gears and literally just counting it. So it wasn't surprising they didn't get entirely accurate all the time.
But all the two-dimensional X-rays of the gears were overlapping, making this task formidable. Price realized if he could find the exact tooth count on a gear wheel, it might begin to unlock the mechanism.
So Price had identified a 127-tooth gear in the X-rays of the mechanism.
He also had the number 235. And these two numbers are very important in ancient Greek astronomy.
Price wondered whether an ancient astronomer might be using the 127 gear wheel to follow the movement of the moon. This was a revolutionary idea.
Price was beginning to have sleepless nights, worrying about the authenticity of the mechanism. If the ancient Greek scientists could produce these gear systems 2,000 years ago, the whole history of Western technology would have to be rewritten.
The team believed such sophistication was surely beyond the great achievements the ancient Greeks had made more than 2 millennia earlier. They are regarded as some of the most creative people the world has ever known. 2,500 years ago, they began a revolution in thinking, followed by technical advances comparable to those of the Industrial Revolution. This peaked in the 5th century BC, when Athens, the largest city-state, produced magnificent art and architecture that is still revered today. In 9 years, they built the huge temple of the Parthenon to their goddess Athena on the sacred Acropolis rock that dominates Athens. Public discussion of ideas and oratory led to larger public events like theatre. This huge theatre at Abydavros could hold 14,000 spectators, and it had superb acoustics. Drop a coin on the stage and it could be heard in the back row. The ancient Greeks developed astronomy, which they treated as a branch of mathematics. They were able to plot how heavenly bodies moved in space and calculate their distances and know the geometry of their orbits. Now, with the mysterious gear wheels, the team suspected ancient astronomers were trying to mechanize the movements of the sun, moon, and planets. Could they put astronomy and complex mathematics into a device and program it to follow the motion of their closest neighbor, the moon?